Thank you.
Thank you. I felt like Michael Strahan with that countdown. Good evening, everyone. This is the continued public hearing of the Milton Zoning Board of Appeals in connection with the comprehensive permit application relating to the property at 648 to 652 Canton Avenue in Milton. I will act as chairman of the board this evening, and with me are my longstanding fellow members, Mike Brown and Ted Daber. We constitute the board for the purposes of this application. Since the last public hearing, we have received some additional information. We received correspondence from the Milton Fire Chief with some additional points that he wanted to be made about the secondary access to the site. We received a fairly comprehensive memo from Mr. Corcoran on behalf of his clients with respect to several outstanding issues from his point of view with respect to the proposal. And we received this afternoon a letter dated December 14th, 2021 from Tetra Tech, who are peer reviewers who are engaged by the town. Sean Reardon in particular was the signatory to the letter. It's a fairly lengthy letter, and I must confess, since it was emailed to me at 4 o'clock, I have not really had a chance to do anything other than skim the highlights. And so I'll have to do that sometime after the hearing tonight. But I thought one thing that we might do, it doesn't have to be the initial thing that we do, but one thing that we might do is to have Mr. Conley run through this letter for us in sort of summary fashion and give us the highlights of each of the points that he raises in the letter. And I think Mr. Conley's with us tonight. Is that correct?
Mr. Reardon?
Sean
Yes.
Reardon?
I'm sorry?
Do you mean Sean?
Yes.
Oh, Sean
Yep,
Reardon.
I'm here. I'm here. Yeah,
Okay, great.
there
Wonderful.
too. Yeah, anytime you'd like.
Okay. Is Mr. Schomer, you're here this evening. Anything you'd like to address as we get started?
Nothing specifically tonight, Mr. Chair. Just to let you know, we have been in contact with the fire chief as well as Mr. Zawinski since the last hearing to try to work through his Chief Madden's issues and his concerns with respect to the site access points. So we're still working through those. We have provided a number of additional documents to him to demonstrate the slope and the accessibility of the secondary access point. So we'll continue to respond to him with any additional requests for information he may have.
Where do we stand at this point on the groundwater mounding analysis?
That is in process. My understanding is that results should be released within a week or so.
Okay. I mean, I think that's an important piece of information that the board certainly needs to have and be able to digest and understand with aid from some of the experts. So that's an important piece of information. I think it might be helpful to have Mr. Reardon, I'm sorry, I get all these Irish names mixed up.
No
We have
worries.
Mr. Reardon speak and sort of take us through this report, and then we'll have a chance obviously later to read it in the fullness of time and read it carefully. But if you could just give us the highlights. My overall impression, just going on a quick read, was that you didn't find too many issues outstanding with respect to this application. And I'd like to hear about that.
Yeah, that's an accurate statement. Yeah, really, let me preface my remarks by saying very pleased with the applicant's response to all of our comments. I think I share that opinion with Cliff Bomer as well. Very, very pleased with how accommodating they've been and how responsive they've been and just the overall quality of the submission. That being said, we started out with a comment list of about 40 items. I think there's probably maybe a half dozen, if that, outstanding. Most of the comments were addressed to our satisfaction exactly as we requested it. The biggest outstanding issues are perhaps some of the things that we touch base on quite often in these projects is there available capacity in the water and sewer system, and can the drainage infrastructure handle the new flow from the project? Those are all in process right now. The applicant's engineer and I met with Marina Fernandez at the DPW, talked about scope and expectations, and I think we're all on the same page with regard to that. I'm not saying that because I think there might be an issue. what we typically do is ask the applicant to provide it so that the board has, a factual record on which they can base their opinion. So there's no indication that there's a problem in the system, but that still doesn't relieve the applicant of the obligation of proving such. Also pleased that in the materials that were provided was a construction management plan. It's pretty comprehensive, addressed some of the hot button issues, including the import of fill. One of the items that we asked for in the original letter was, given how much fill is anticipated for the site, we wanted a number for that. Turns out it's over 30,000 yards, which in my calculation is upwards of 1,600 truck deliveries. Now, just so there's no confusion, people use the word trips quite often. In a traffic sense, a trip is a coming and going. So that constitutes 2 trips. So every time a vehicle comes to the site and goes back to where it came from, that's 2 trips. So when I say trip in this application, it's actually 1,600 times the vehicle comes to the site and leaves. So it would correlate to 3,200 trips when in a traffic context.
Over what period of time would that occur?
Yeah, it's hard to say, but I would imagine it's going to have to happen in one sort of constant process. In other words, I don't see an opportunity for it to be sort of broken up into multiple phases. So I would expect it to be a 2 to 4 month period where they'll be, hauling in material. They did give some numbers in the construction management plan of 60 truck trips per day. And again, I think that's 60 times to and from the site, so 120 trips total. So I could do the math for you, but that seems like a little light number in my opinion, that I would expect that during the height of their fill operations, they'll be bringing in more than 60 vehicles a day. But that's what it says in the construction management plan. If the board chooses to hold them to that, we can certainly come up with ways that they can do that.
And would that be between the hours of like 8 and 4 or 8 and 5? What would the hours of operation be?
They get in the construction management plan, they gave working hours, but they also did speak about coordinating deliveries to work around like school bus times and things like that. As part of their construction management plan, there's pre-construction meeting with the town to sort of work those details out. My experience is the more we can sort of dictate in a decision, the easier it makes the work effort when it comes down to actually planning things out. But in my experience, it's always a good idea to while the school buses are out on the roads, that it's not a good idea to be having, in my mind, truck deliveries are potential problems full or empty. So full trucks have a hard time stopping. Empty trucks tend to be driven faster than full trucks. So, I would love to see a condition that limits the truck deliveries to hours where the students aren't in transit.
Do you have a sense of what the directional flow of that will be? I mean, where are those trucks going to be coming from?
They did provide a figure in the construction management plan. It basically said either direction on Canton Ave, depending on whether they're coming from south on 93 or north on 93.
Where does the fill come from?
That's not specified, and I wouldn't imagine that's something that probably gets determined based on opportunity in and around construction.
Okay. But you think it could come from either direction, depending on circumstance? Correct.
And I also think that regardless of whether it's coming from the north or south, you could dictate a particular travel route. They'll just have to travel further along on the highway. The only thing you have to balance there is whether or not making them drive further is a good idea. I tend to prefer having one known route of travel so that you can sort of dictate a little bit better what's going to happen.
Right. It's just that just thinking out loud, it seems like it could make a difference whether they were going to be making left-hand turns or right-hand turns into the site in terms of impact on traffic flow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the flip side of that is they're going to be coming and going. So they're going to be making one left and one right. But to your point, we could make them go one direction when they arrive and one direction when they leave so that they're taking mostly left turns or mostly right for that matter. Right turns tend to be a difficult thing for larger trucks because of the smaller inside radius. So it might be a little counterintuitive, but.
Okay. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, and I just, I think we've got some minor outstanding items relative to drainage and engineering type things that I'd like to continue to have a discussion with the applicant about. I don't sense any sort of resistance or any antagonism or any kind of anything other than a cooperative relationship there. So there's a couple things that I'd like to explore a little further with them to see if we can make things better. Very interested in seeing the results of the groundwater mounding, because it's my understanding that part of the reason the site is so high is to address concerns related to groundwater mounding. So if in fact the analysis shows that we have some flexibility there, my hope is that it may be able to manifest itself as a reduction in the height of the site. I don't know if that's the case, but that would certainly do a lot to reduce the number of truck trips and reduce the time of construction and all the other ancillary construction related risks.
I mean, I think the water issue is probably the principal issue, frankly, to the neighbors. I mean, I think they have existing conditions of, groundwater and saturation and the like, and I think they're very, very concerned about what this project is going to do to that groundwater. So it's critical, I think, to the analysis. And I look forward finally to someday seeing this groundwater mounding study, so that maybe it will help us to better understand and maybe make the neighbors feel more comfortable, although I think that's unlikely. But it's a critical issue, I think, to the neighborhood.
Yeah, if it helps put your mind at ease a little bit, surface runoff and groundwater act fundamentally different. So
Right.
surface water is fast, it's abrupt, it's got a lot of energy. Groundwater moves very slowly, sometimes 2 feet a day. So we need to be careful of it, because the challenge with groundwater is even if it rises an inch, that could be the difference between flooding something and not flooding something. So we want to have that good, robust analysis. But in terms of the sort of the acute impacts, our priority is generally stormwater runoff because of the negative consequences with not dealing with that properly.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to getting that mounding study. Okay. Other issues that you wanted to cover?
No. Again, just really, really good work by the applicant's team. Good relationship. Anxious to see the information that's forthcoming, and hope we can make some last modifications, reduce that site elevation a little bit, reduce some truck trips, but we'll see.
Do any of the other board members have questions for Mr. Conley? Mr. Daver?
No, I don't. No.
How about
Okay.
Mr. Brown? Any questions?
I just have a question about the construction management plan and the pre-construction meeting. Is the number of truck trips or the truck deliveries concerns me a little bit, just because I know Canton Ave and I know that the traffic is an issue on that street, regardless of when school is in session or out of session, or when the buses are on the street. And I wonder if that will also be the subject of the construction meeting. And I know that that's maybe not an appropriate question, but maybe just with your general knowledge, Mr. Reardon, is that something that would also be discussed at that meeting?
Yeah, definitely. And what you can also explore too is there's one thing to have conditions in rules. There's also, it's another thing to have accountability. So it doesn't do any good if there's no way to sort of identify which trucks are from the project. So for example, when we've had other projects like this that were massive soil transport projects, we had a placard system for the delivery trucks so that they could be identified as project traffic, so that if a neighbor saw someone doing something wrong, they'd have a way of identifying as being associated with the project. So those are all things that we can consider. To your question about volumes, they did in the construction management plan talk about the 60 trips in the context of 12,000 trips on Canton Ave. So to your point, Michael, yeah, very heavily traveled road. It's good from the standpoint that the truck's not going to be a big blip in the increased volume, but it's a bad because, well, it's additional congestion and additional potential for problems.
Thank you.
Mr. Corcoran, did you have any questions for Mr.
I
Conley?
do.
I do. My first question would be whether you have peer reviewed their calculation for the volume of material.
I haven't done the count yet. I'm sort of waiting till the groundwater mounting analysis plays itself out to see if we can do something to reduce it, regardless of what the numbers are. But I will check that.
We've done our own calculation. It's a very simple geometric analysis. It does not account for compaction and or the removal of soils. I'm wondering whether you've seen a geotechnical analysis.
Have not.
We don't know what volume of materials might have to be removed before new materials are coming in.
Correct.
Our calculation, Mr. Chair, is that once complete, the change in elevation will produce 52,000 cubic yards of new fill. That does not count the volume of fill that is needed to be installed and compacted. And it does not account for the volume of fill that needs to replace fill that must come out, because that material is not sufficient. We're prepared to have those numbers peer reviewed, but it's a significant adjustment from what the applicant has been suggesting. If it's 52,000 total change from existing conditions to finished conditions, that's got to equate to more like 75,000 cubic yards of fill. If you're talking about 6-inch lifts during compaction or 12-inch lifts during compaction, volume of material to be removed, volume of material to be replaced. That is just an extraordinary number of trips of volume of material, and the number of trips associated that will be off the charts. And I think those numbers need to be peer reviewed. I also think it's important at this point that the applicant produce a geotechnical analysis so that we can understand what the volume of materials will be coming out of the site and how much will have to be replaced. So I'd request that the board request the applicant to provide that type of information. And I'd ask the board request that the calculations be peer reviewed, and we're prepared to have our calculations peer reviewed.
I guess I'll ask Mr. Shulman to respond to that.
The response to Attorney Cochran regarding a geotechnical analysis is a no, Mr. Chair. It's not something that's required for unsubsidized projects, and it's not appropriate at this early stage in the permitting process for this project either. I know that our civil engineer, Phil Cordero from Allen and Major, is on the line as well. If he could be allowed in as a panelist, perhaps he could respond more substantively to these points that Attorney Cochran is making. I would reserve judgment in terms of the specifics of what he's saying, just because Attorney Cochran is not, to my knowledge, a geotechnical engineer. So I would wait to hear from his consultants if he has any information or data that he would like to share with us. To date, we haven't seen any.
Are you expecting to do that at some point, Mr. Corcoran?
I am
You think maybe for the next hearing, whenever that's
happy
going to be?
happy to have it available for the next meeting. I do have some preliminary renderings that I can show that show the height, modifications to the height of the site. Mr. Boma referred to the prior base as a plinth. This is really an earthen plinth. At some points in the site, the elevation is being raised by as much as 11 feet. And other locations along the edges of the property, it's 5 to 7 to 8 feet. That's a story. The entire site is being raised by a full story. Then they're putting 2.5 to 3.5 story buildings on top. And they're putting those buildings up against the edges of the property, overlooking my client's properties. The Kelly property, there's 3 buildings right along the edge of the Kelly property. There are 2 buildings along the edge of the Janiga property, and there's a large building proximate to folks opposite on Holmes Lane.
Well, we look forward to hearing from your experts at the next hearing, Mr. Corcoran,
Thank
to sort of amplify and explain some of the points that you've raised this evening. Mr. Schumer, we're happy to let your site civil guy come on. as a
Thank you.
panelist. If, can you do that, Bev?
He's on.
Oh,
I'm,
right.
I'm here, Mr. Chairman. She promoted me during the discussion.
It's very easy to get a promotion in this league.
If only real life were this easy, we could just push a button on Zoom.
It's
That would be
funny. I don't
fun.
find that there's that many people vying for these spots on Board of Appeals.
I'd like to fall back into the audience if I can, Beverly. If you could slide me back in, I'll just watch from afar. But if I could, for the record, Phil Cordero from Allen and Major Associates, I'll add just some brief color to the discussion. It'll generally echo a couple of the points that Mr. Reardon and then Attorney Corcoran just raised regarding the site. So just as a reminder for the members of the public and certainly the members of the board, the height of the site and the earthwork associated with it is driven by the water conditions on site. And Mr. Reardon pointed that out in his memo, is that the elevations of the site are derivative of the necessary drainage. And then the necessary drainage results in the fill volumes that are referenced in the materials. Turning towards Attorney Corcoran's points relative to the evaluation that was presumably done by one of the abutters that maybe had the construction background, given the level of detail, but we'll look forward to hearing more about that. The numbers that we represented at the previous hearing were simplified analyses, which is generally volume of existing surface, or excuse me, elevation of existing surface to elevation of proposed surface, and the necessary movement volumes that get from one to the other. Therein lies several layers of complexity, as we've talked about. Attorney Corcoran is correct in that if there is soil that needs to be stripped from the site in a to be determined value, that would be reflected in the final numbers. There's also the inherent materials to construct the pavement, the foundations, the slabs of the building, and a very, very large comprehensive drainage system. Those are all factored into those numbers. So what we always represented through the testimony in prior meetings is around the number of 30,000 yards. And again, simplified existing grade to proposed grade. That number is going to be very well refined through the process and refined by analyses through not only my team and my engineers, but once we have the contractors on board, once we do the final geotechnical evaluation to determine what the stripping volume is, and it will result in a final number, which we're happy to publish to the board, happy to peer review. No reason not to share that information. It will be fully transparent. But what I would suggest the board look at through the lens of the construction management plan to establish the skeletal framework for how the site will be managed and how the trips of soil being brought into and out of the site will be conducted relative to primary trucking routes, hours of operation, necessity for sweeping of Canton Avenue on a regular basis, coordination with the school department, coordination with the police department and all necessary parties. And then we will infill underneath there the exactness of the materials that need to be done to bring into the site. And we can report all of that through the pre-construction meeting to all parties that'll be purview to that. So while the number is still moving, and we absolutely agree with Mr. Reardon's position is that once the groundwater mounding analyses comes back, if there's an opportunity to lower the site because we have flexibility in what that number tells us, we will do that. It certainly benefits us in terms of economics. It benefits us in terms of scheduled time. Obviously, the benefit to the abutters through Attorney Corcoran's memo is inherent if we can lower the site, of course. But we have to go into it using a defined set of parameters to meet the stormwater management standards. And that's what we've proposed, and that's what's been peer reviewed to this point. So the earthwork number in summary will provide final detailing of that for record, but we're not there yet. And as Mr. Reardon pointed out, we should in fact wait for the groundwater mounding, and then we can wrap everything up into one final detailed analysis. So happy to field any questions from any members of the board regarding that.
No, I think I'm good. Chad, you or Mike have any questions?
Thank you. I'll stand by if anything else arises, Mr. Chairman and members of the board.
Okay,
Tim Zawinski has his hand up.
okay. Tim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question for Sean Reardon, if I can ask that, just going back to the kind of conversation about the construction management plan and the number of truck trips. Sean, in your experience, kind of with conditions on these types of 40B projects, is there ever kind of a consistent enough schedule that perhaps like a police detail could be kind of worked out to, you know, help trucks get in and out and kind of disrupt traffic in the kind of least impactful way? Or is it just so kind of contingent upon, you know, day-to-day conditions that it doesn't make sense to do that?
You're muted.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the delivery can be prescribed, whether it's routes, whether it's hours, whether it's volume. So to your question, Tim, I think there are a lot of things that can be done to control that activity. But you want to be conscious of the fact that, you know, if you slow it down, you make it longer. So it's kind of a balancing game.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm less interested in, you know, you know, the intent behind anything like that wouldn't be to slow it down. But if there's kind of, you know, bumper to bumper traffic on Canton Ave, and, you know, it kind of makes sense to kind of stop it in one way, you know, to let a couple trucks through. You know, I'm just trying to sort of, if it's a given that we're going to have this number of truck trips, which I think you know, pretty concisely laid out the kind of, you know, big picture. It's not a ton of trips relative to the entirety of Canton Ave, but small picture, they're disruptive trips. You know, we want to kind of try to keep all those options open. So I think, you know, I'm going to put a pin in that, and maybe we can talk about that when we talk through conditions. You know, just something to explore when we talk through the pre-construction meeting.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen anything sort of like where you've done things offsite to sort of streamline the delivery. Like I'm visualizing a, you know, a police escort for trucks. Yeah, that's usually not something that's considered. Yeah, truck drivers are used to dealing with traffic every day. They know ways to get around it. What we want to do is make sure that they're not taking routes that we don't want them to take.
Yeah, no, Sean, I now I'm thinking like the Celtics kind of, you know, going to the airport or something. That's not what I was thinking. I was thinking of like, you know, a police officer kind of at the driveway, you know, kind of directing traffic if there's a need for that. I mean, if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. I'm just trying to kind of think of, you know, potential solutions to kind of, you know, mitigate some of those impacts. So if it's not something that's typically done, then, you know, whatever. But if there's an example out there, I think it's worth looking into.
Police detail at the driveway is absolutely reasonable, but beyond that, I would say probably not. But and there'd be also other benefits to having the police at the entry as well for other deliveries and other activities.
Is that it, Tim?
Yeah, that was it. Sorry.
Sean, were there any other points that you wanted to cover for us this evening?
No, I think anxiously awaiting the results of the analysis, particularly the groundwater mounding, and then we'll see what more progress we can make.
Okay,
We have two attendees with hands up.
sure.
Alrighty. Stan?
Hi, this is Stan Janiga. I mentioned my experience back some time ago, hundreds if not thousands of projects. I listened to developers council say it's not appropriate to do geotechnical work at this point. And I find that comment, I'll be quite honest, frightening. Geotechnical analysis helps you define what your foundations are, where you might put your utilities, where you put the drainage that they're talking about, and yet they don't seem to think that that's important. I find that once the concept of a project is done, just concept now, geotechnical work is necessary before design starts. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Was there another attendee?
Yes, Lara? I'm sorry, I gotta unmute you. All right.
Hi, Lara Roach, 44 Holmes Lane. I have a question for Mr. Cordero, if I may.
Okay,
Yeah, okay. So Mr. Cordero, you mentioned that you used I quote, a simplified analysis. It seems that the simplified analysis is actually just an analysis that is more favorable for the proposal that you are putting forth. You've mentioned that you'll have to refine the numbers. You know, it seems to many folks that these numbers will actually have to be increased, and refined and increased are not synonyms. So in terms of, safety, traffic, all of those things, how do we evaluate that now if numbers are going to be refined pretty significantly, it seems? So my question for you is, why are we not evaluating worst case now? Why are we, it seems, evaluating best case? And why can't we think about, what's the worst case? What are the biggest numbers that we may be dealing with here, and how do we solve for that? Thank you.
Mr. Cordero, you want to answer that?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make sure you'd like me to address it. To Ms. Roche, excuse me. I don't want to indicate in any way that our analysis is overly simplified. And I certainly would not want to project that it's to the benefit of us as the applicant or the applicant's representative and development team. It is a computer model. And it is our best guess at what the earthwork is necessary to do for the site. There are experts on many levels on all teams. And what we choose to do as part of the analysis, as part of the site design, is to be able to predict those numbers in a generalized fashion, so long as we can qualify what those numbers mean. When we have our construction personnel in place, we engage with them as the professionals in soil management and movement of the soil in terms of how that's going to be done, the shrink factors, the swell factors, the placement, the movement, the operational aspects. And only when that's available do we get the full picture. And part of that is also what Stan Janiga pointed out, which is we layer in the geotechnical analyses. The borings would be tested, boring locations would be tested for the final foundation design of the building. And that gets plugged into the program for the site and how the site is built out. So we're not overly simplifying it. We also don't want to create this sky is falling scenario, this absolutely worst case situation, which is not a true indicator, which is a false predictor of how the site would really be managed. The fact that we've engaged Jobin to perform to assemble the construction management plan really is part of the process, and that their involvement, their engagement will be continually refined, and that's how the process plays out. I can't speak just while I'm here, and I see Stan's hand is raised, and he raised a very important point about the geotechnical analyses, but I certainly can't speak to his particular experience and his projects in terms of when a geotech was engaged based on the nature of those sites. We often, as I testified previously in front of the zoning board, the process is to confirm that the project is viable, the project is permittable, the project is buildable, and then additional consultants are engaged to perform final design, final architecture, final MEP, final fire protection design, all of the additional information that is necessary to obtain building permits for the site. There is still very much a long way to go. We just want to get through the process here with the zoning board to confirm that it's a permittable project before the additional consultants get engaged, which they of course will be. And as additional data becomes available from those consultants, from the experts and professionals, it refines the project and gets us to the finish line that we're all looking towards. Ms. Roche, did that satisfactorily answer your question? Maybe it's not the answer you want to hear, but if I can advance on it in any way, please let me know.
No, I don't think I would say that it's, not the answer I don't want to hear, or not the answer I want to hear. I just want to hear an answer that's perhaps, accurate and truthful, And I'm just not sure that's the case. I think, the simplified analysis, it seems that our team, Attorney Corcoran had already talked about this a bit. We did a simplified calculation also, and our numbers were quite higher than what your team has put forth. So I guess, and you said you don't want to create a scenario that says the sky is falling, and I totally agree. However, I also don't want to see a scenario in the opposite way, right? And that's not realistic. So I think that it would make sense to have something maybe in the middle, but your team seems to be sort of on the opposite end. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roach. Again, through the chair, just to add one more little button to that. We certainly are in receipt of Attorney Corcoran's memo from today. We have not analyzed the detail that's in that memo either, having just received it today. So we have work to do to obviously verify that, and we'll verify our numbers as part of that process.
Okay.
Stan is.
Hi.
Stan?
Yes, this is Elizabeth Janiga, Stan's daughter. I live at 658 Canton Avenue.
Good evening.
And my question is for Mr. Cordero. Yeah, my father's experience perhaps is irrelevant for you, but or to you, but for the record, it's worked on local, state, and federal level. That said, I have neighbors that are in the construction industry, that are architects, et cetera, and are engineers. And I've spoken to friends, and they tell me the same thing. The geotechnical is the first thing that you do. So can you just say why you did not initially do a geotechnical to see if you could even build what you're proposing to build? Just a simple why.
Well, through the chair, to
ahead.
answer, thank you, Ms. Janiga's question. It's not a question of why did we choose not to do it. There's an order of operations to how the site has been laid out, and we've conducted on-site test pits to obtain information. It's reflected on the plans in terms of type of material, depth of material, certainly water table elevation. Those are all data points that are used in the analysis and the design. That information is also provided to the geotechnical engineer, who will then advise as to what his appropriate scope, his or her appropriate scope would be, to then fully scope the site and produce one final geotechnical report, which will include those foundation recommendations. So it's not a choice to not do it. It's a choice to work the process the way that is common to these types of projects. And again, not discounting your husband's experience in any way or any of the projects that he works on. But for this particular project, for this order of operation, this is the path that's laid out for us, and we believe it's appropriate at this stage.
Just Mr. Cordero, just one question for myself. Is it an economic issue? I mean, is it you don't want to do it because it's expensive and you don't want to incur that expense until you're confident that you have the permit? Is that the reason that you wait? Or is there some other reason that's not so obvious to me?
I wouldn't want to present that it's an economical issue. The cost has to be incurred eventually. The report does need to be done. But you hit on the bullet point, which is it's infeasible for most developers, most applicants to engage all of the necessary consultants for any project until they've confirmed that the project is permittable and viable, Mr. Chairman.
Right. But I mean, just speaking out loud, I mean, it presents sort of a chicken and egg situation for the board, doesn't it? So you say, this is our best guess that we guess is too strong a word. This is our best estimate of the numbers. And so we'd like you to give us a permit. And then once we get that permit, then we can really go out and test those numbers. But at that point, it's too late for the board to do anything. If your numbers come back completely different, or more troublesome for the neighborhood, then the board is powerless at that point, unless we put some very specific conditions, which I don't think you would want us to do, in the decision that said, you can't move more than X thousand cubic yards of soil, or whatever the conditions might be. That's sort of the conundrum that we find ourselves in, isn't it?
I certainly can understand the position from experience from other projects where we've encountered certain situations. The board does possess the power to discuss any conditions that they feel are necessary to protect the interest of the town relative to the project. So I don't think anybody on this.
No, but that's
Yes.
not the point, though.
Mhm.
We don't have the knowledge and the expertise to pick out a number. I mean, we can't, if you come in and say, we're gonna move 30,000 cubic yards of dirt, and we don't have the ability to say the knowledge to come in and say, well, we think you ought to make that 50,000, because there's no basis for us to do that.
Mhm.
But what you're saying is if it comes in at 50,000 after the fact, after the permit's issued, that's tough luck. I mean, that's just the way it goes. And I think that's what people are having trouble with as a concept, but that's the way this is going to work.
Mr. Chair, if I could add a little bit for you.
Go ahead.
So just so everybody's clear, there's been a lot of geotechnical work done on the site. So the information that feeds into our stormwater analysis is all geotechnical information. What hasn't been done is a geotechnical design for final pavement foundations, final building foundations. Those are necessarily going to be informed by the scope of the improvements. So they'll have to know what their buildings are before they can finalize that work. So I don't want the impression to be out there that no geotechnical work has been done. Quite the opposite. Quite a bit has. It has been done specifically to inform the civil engineering side of things, which is sort of the critical thing to evaluate at this point. In regard to sort of the specificity of the number, we have AutoCAD, which can compare surfaces to down to the cubic foot. So if Phil and his team shares his proposed surface and the existing surface, we can validate that number down to 100 cubic feet because the systems are that accurate. So I have very little concern that the bulk numbers are going to change drastically. What does change is how people characterize them. So what is fill? What is imported material for foundations? But what doesn't change is the existing surface to the finished surface, and that's what sort of drives that underlying number. And I have a high degree of confidence that that number can be determined very exactly. At this point, though, I do think there's an opportunity for it to change in the downward direction by virtue of the mounting analysis. If we find that the mounting analysis doesn't require 4 feet of separation from groundwater table and we can make it 2 feet, that reduces the height of the site by about 2 feet, which is a significant volume. And I'd rather not go through the exercise now until that mounting analysis has been done.
That's helpful. Thank you. I think we all are looking forward to the mounting analysis. Okay.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just a last comment from us. And I go back to something that Cliff Ballmer said last spring, is that in the suburban setting, you start with the ground, you determine what the ground can hold, and then you hand it to the architect. They've done the reverse. They've done 4 different stormwater management systems, and they're still trying to figure out whether what they've proposed can work. They haven't done the analysis. They haven't provided the material that needs to be provided. They haven't done the geotechnical analysis that determines what the quality of the soils are relative to how much material has to come in, et cetera. I agree. The groundwater mounting analysis is going to be critical, in part because it's going to inform us what's going to happen with the wetland or the combination of wetlands. There are 2 wetlands that abut this property. There's the stream that is on the Kelly property, and there's the wetland on the Janiga property. They've estimated edge of wetland, but there are going to be impacts to that wetland that need to be managed, and they're going to have to deal with the Conservation Commission at some point on that. At this point, I think it'd be appropriate for them to go out and flag that wetland so that we know where the edge of wetland is and where the setbacks are, because there are going to be impacts. But I've used this term before. This is a cynical process. You do a little bit here and a little bit there, you get to a permit, and then all hell can break loose. And that's our concern, because we've done the very simple calculation of volume. And it's dramatically more than 30,000 cubic yards. And the impact of that, and the impact of the construction of that on the surrounding neighborhood is going to be unbelievable, because they're going to have to clear cut the site to do all of the work. And it's going to be full of dust and mud for months. And that dust and mud is going to blow around the neighborhood. It's going to be difficult to control and manage. It's going to have impact on the wetlands, et cetera. They're not going to be able to manage that. This project will be this neighborhood's worst nightmare during the construction. There is another project out there. I've made that point. One that doesn't require feet and feet of new fill. One that works with the land, one that pays attention to impacts to wetlands, and one that pays attention to impacts to abutters. And it is a feasible project that gets to a good outcome. But this project isn't close. They have a long way to go. And I look forward to presenting our materials with my experts at a future meeting.
I appreciate that. And that was more in the nature of a final argument, I think, but I get your points, but we'll hear from your experts when the time is right.
Thank you.
And we'll look at the groundwater mounding analysis when it's complete, and we'll deal with all those issues then. But was there anything further that that our peer review consultant wanted to present tonight, or have we covered all the points?
My information is complete.
Okay. Okay, well, hopefully I have a chance to, I hopefully have a chance to read this more carefully after this evening, just to go through your various points. I'm sorry to cut you off, but what were you gonna say?
We have two more attendees.
Okay, we'll hear from all attendees.
Yes, yeah. Cheryl?
Good evening, Cheryl Tagayas, 660 Canton Avenue. I just wanted to ask a question about the ground water mounding analysis. I have been reviewing a 40B project in another community in which a groundwater mounding analysis has been done, and the report is on that town's website. And in reviewing it, I noticed they had a site plan which located dozens and dozens of test pits that were performed in order to do that analysis. And I note that I don't believe any additional test pits have been conducted on these properties since the initial ones were done. And I'd like to understand, if I may, through Mr. Reardon, if that's what his expectation would be in the groundwater mounding analysis, or would there be an expectation for additional test pits? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, they've done quite a few test pits. I anticipate that it'll be enough to inform their mounding analysis. And what I understand, they're going to be using what's called mod flow, which is a real robust mounding analysis. So I expect to get really good results from that.
Okay. There was one other attendee. Did you say, Bill?
Yeah, yes, thank you. KR Patton? I'm sorry, that's all I can say. No.
Okay.
Hello, this is Kathleen Patton. I live on 93 Wendell Park. So far, we've been talking about consequences of the construction itself during the construction, the issues of water handling, all of the dirt that will be moved. Those of us that live, there is a large neighborhood that lives below this site on the other side of Canton Avenue. And that would be initially the first tier that would be affected would be Wendell Park, Elm, and Gulliver. This neighborhood has many homes, and most of the homes have these basements that have had difficulties with water. We've been talking about construction, but I would like to hear about the impact after the construction going forward. Downhill, excuse me, my father was a civil engineer. I am not, I'm just a pediatrician. But my father taught me water runs downhill. Water always runs downhill, Kathleen. And the people here, many of them have adjustments to their basements for water handling, multiple septic pumps, French drains. Some of them have had all kinds of civil engineering around their house. And we still get water down here. Wendell Park Stream runs between two of the streets, both sides of Wendell Park. That stream will probably be the repository of that water. And our basements here will be the holding tanks and repositories of that water and all of the mud. I would like some comments or discussion of what's going to happen to us after the construction going forward. I appreciate Mr. Corcoran's comments, and I was listening intently to Stan's comments as well as Mr. Reardon and Mr. Cordero's comments. But how would those of us downhill where this water is going to end up, how do we approach this? What can we find out now?
Mr. Reardon, is that something you could address?
Yeah, and I think the groundwater mounting analysis will provide some sort of tools for everybody to understand the issue a little bit better, and also a reliable source of projections for what's going to happen. I think people will be surprised at how modest the groundwater impacts are going to manifest as. For example, I wouldn't expect there to be any perceptible mound 30 feet from the proposed infiltration systems, based on my experience. Usually it's 20 to inside 20 feet. So the net result is, but by the time you reach the project boundary, the groundwater table is going to be exactly as it was prior to the project. The stormwater standards do a great deal to try and prevent those kind of impacts from happening. That's why they require the mounting analysis if you're close to groundwater, more to sort of make sure that your stormwater systems function properly. Because again, our number one priority is that the water that runs off the surface, that the project unquestionably is increasing because it's turning what are basically impervious surfaces into or basically pervious surfaces into impervious, creating more runoff. We need to make sure that that water is handled appropriately, because that's the water that's gonna cause problems. I've never run into a situation where stormwater manifests itself as a groundwater problem. When you have wastewater systems that infiltrate into the ground and are the same water day after day that didn't exist prior, sometimes you have a problem then. But I think people will be pleasantly surprised by how minor the groundwater impacts are going to be.
Okay, thank you. Have any further?
It looks like there is one more. Leonardo?
Okay,
Oh, I get it on. Oh, wait a minute. There's another one. I'm sorry. Where'd you go, Leonardo? Oh. His hand's down. Let's take David.
okay.
Yes, this is David Taher. I live at 756 Canton Avenue. I'm about 500 yards above the proposed site that's being studied. I would just like to report that I am very impressed with all of the engineering, and I appreciate the education that you bring to this process. I would only like to point out that our house, which is at least 20 to 30 feet above the site that you are proposing be built, we have water in our basement on a regular basis. I think Mother Nature wins on this, guys. I think that in the Milton Times this week, the hospital is trying to build something on Highland Avenue that the Conservation Committee has already described as, quote, a swamp. I just think that if you take a step back and think about what you're trying to do, that there's gotta be a different way to do this without causing so much angst and so much damage to the environment. You know it. I know you know it because you're educated and you got it. I just don't understand why you're trying to keep pushing a rock uphill. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Is that it, Bev?
Yeah, no. Leonardo, are you around to talk? Are you available to talk?
Sorry about that. It's Kristen Rappa, Leonardo's wife. We live at 654 Canton Avenue, directly across from the proposed 652 project. I just wanted to take a moment and thank everybody, yes, for your hard work. Just a detail that I would like to bring up is that it's been mentioned about the stream and the wetlands, but I just want to remind everybody that down there on Wendell Park, there is a sign that says that this stream is feeding the Neponset River, which is a big, very important piece of water in this area, and it is federally protected. And I just, I do appreciate Mr. Reardon's mentioning that he feels as though it's probably not going to affect us too much, or affect the stormwater should not be overly affected. But these waters have been mentioned as being, or been called headwaters for the Neponset River. And I do believe personally, although I am not an engineer, that it will affect more than just this immediate neighborhood. I have no doubt that my yard will be affected. My basement will be affected. I'm directly across the street. I am down. We're downgrade from the project, especially if we're going to add, they will add another 5 feet to 7 feet to 11 feet of height for PILF. I do strongly believe that my yard will be consistently flooded. Forget about my yard. I'm just one person. Laura Roach is just another person. Beth Janiga is just one more person. Forget about the neighbors. Let's think about the biggest picture and how far it's going to extend. I do believe that there's more than just the immediate neighbors who will be affected and the immediate wetlands that will be affected. I do believe that it's our responsibility to protect the wetlands, period. These are very historical waters, and I do believe that there's more to it, much like the last, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name, the last person who spoke. I do believe that you're trying to push a rock uphill, and I echo Mr. Corcoran in saying that there is a different project that can be done that's smaller, that doesn't need to be so gigantic, and have such an impact, not only on our neighborhood, but also on the environment around us. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have Kathleen.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the people that just spoke, Leonard, or the person subbing in for Leonard, and Mr. Tauger. The issue is, and if I could reemphasize this, it's not just our basements. The Neponset River watershed runs through that property, runs above it, runs on it, runs below it, and runs downhill. And it all goes into Wendell Park Stream, which goes into the brook, Pine Tree Brook, which goes into the Neponset River. It is all protected. It's not only mud in our basement, but it is a major protected area. So there are several issues. And we're not talking about what's going to happen afterward. So I am not sure how we would approach that. And it's not only surface water. It's the water that's added to the water that is already being disrupted or rerouted on the property. How do we mitigate that? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's talk about scheduling, if we could.
Tim has his hand up. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to
Tim.
interrupt you. Zawinski.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, actually, I was going to wait until everyone was done because I did want to just give you a little bit of insight into what we're looking at on our end for scheduling purposes. As Mr. Schomer said earlier, Chief Madden from the Milton Fire Department is reviewing some of the materials that were presented at the previous meeting. They've been talking with him about some of his concerns. So my hope is that we will have some either written confirmation from Chief Madden that his concerns have been addressed, or if we need to bring him back in for further testimony, if those concerns haven't been addressed, then we can make those arrangements, certainly. And then also on the peer review angle, I don't believe that Mr. Bomer has a significant number of additional comments based on these revised materials, but he has said that he will get written comments into the board And then we can, again, figure out if further oral testimony from him is necessary, or if the written comments will suffice. So those are just the two sort of outstanding issues based on the materials we've got right now.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. Mr. Schomer, what's your thoughts on scheduling?
I would say, Mr. Chair, we currently have until the 11th of January of next year in the public hearing. That gives us time for at least, I would say, at least 2 to 3 more hearings if the board would like to come back and hear additional comment from Attorney Cochran's clients. And we obviously need to get into the issue of the groundwater mounding. I would leave it to the pleasure of the board to determine when the next hearing is appropriate. There may not be enough advance notice of the groundwater mounding by next Tuesday to have a meeting, but I would leave that up to the board if you'd like to hold that date.
I mean, my own sense of this, everyone else can chime in on this, but I think we ought to continue it to January 11th. I mean, it's just not really a time of year, I think, when people want to be doing this. And as long as we can have a couple of hearing dates after January 11th, then I think that'll be okay. But presumably by that point, we'll have that groundwater analysis, that mounding analysis done.
Yes, that's my understanding, Mr. Chair. That will be done. That should be done within a week or so.
Okay, and it would be helpful if we had it in our hands more than a day or two before the hearing. As you all know, we all work and we need time, and a lot of times we need weekends to read some of this stuff. And so getting things the day before the hearing isn't particularly helpful. So
understood.
Whatever can be done to ensure that we have that groundwater mounding analysis in sufficient time before January 11th, that we can sort of read it carefully and be able to formulate intelligent questions about it, that would be ideal. And then on the 11th, we can see where we are. I would invite Mr. Corcoran to also have whatever people lined up to be there for the 11th. Maybe they'll spill over until maybe the following week, the 18th, but at least they ought to be ready to offer their testimony and thoughts on the 11th.
We'll be ready for that, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, so this has been helpful tonight. Thank you to the various peer reviewers and other experts who have offered their testimony tonight. It's always helpful to get that information and try to sift through it. We'll look forward to the long-awaited groundwater mounding analysis, and we'll take it up with the next hearing on January 11th. So,
Mr. Chair, may I be heard just very, very briefly, maybe 1 minute before we close, just to sort of tie up a couple of the issues that have been raised by yourself and by Mr. Cochran and some of his clients. I didn't want to let the meeting end without making note of this. And the last thing that we would do in this hearing process is to diminish the perception of the neighbors and their concerns and their fears, frankly, about what this project is going to be. I think we all understand that what is on the site now is it's a single house, two houses on 2 different lots. And that's the way it's been for all recent memory. So we certainly appreciate and understand that these neighbors are concerned about what the site is going to become and what that means for them and their quality of life. And that's the reason why we've worked as hard as we have with Chief Madden, with Mr. Reardon, with Chase Berkeley, and with the town department heads to try to respond to and address the concerns to the best that we can during this process. In response to the point that was made delicately by yourself, Mr. Chair, that the board would not have an opportunity to review this further if there were changes to be made. What I would say to that is just to remind everyone, and I know that this is the challenging part of the 40B process, because what we're proposing is so much bigger than what's allowed under local zoning. There is additional process that happens once this board closes this procedure. The board, I would say, is very well served by your consultant who's here tonight, Ms. Barrett. This is the 3rd 40B that's now going through this process, and the second one, which is coming to a close, also with my client's The decision on that as drafted is close to 60 pages long, full of conditions with the exact sort of protection for these sorts of situations that we're talking about tonight. So there is room for the board's further review. There is a process for review of all of these issues by the professional consultants, by outside consultants like Mr. Reardon, to make sure that all of these concerns, to the extent they come up post permitting, are appropriately addressed and resolved to everyone's satisfaction. So just request that the neighbors in particular bear that in mind, that while all of the answers are certainly, it's understood by us, are wanted at this point, they may not all be there, but the process will be established to protect them. And that's what the board is here to do, is to protect the neighbors. And that's what Mr. Reardon is here to do as well as all the department heads. So I know that's not the most comfort that everyone wants, but please accept our assurances to all the neighbors that these are things that we're keeping in mind. We're working on these, and the process will protect their interests and their quality of life to the extent we absolutely can. So thank you very much.
Okay. All right, we'll resume on January 11th. Thank you all for attending and participating this evening.
Thank you.
Everybody
Happy
have a
holidays.
Great
all.
holiday.
Happy holidays.
The recording has stopped.